Right here. Awesome. Welcome to the AI Conversations. I'm here with the lovely, the wonderful Erica Veal. Erica, if I'm your host, Nick Shutt. Erica, if you could please just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got here.
Oh yeah, not a problem. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it. You could be anywhere, and we're here having this conversation, so that's great. I am Erica Veal. I go by Evil because it sounds cooler, and I'm working on my doctorate, so I can be Dr. Evil. It's literally the only reason why I'm doing
I love
it.
it.
Yeah. And I've been working in the data space for quite some time now. And for the last few years, I've worked around data monitoring and observability. And I consider myself a data and responsible AI activist, meaning that I advocate for social change using data and for human rights while when it comes to AI. So yeah, my journey here has been a roller coaster. It's been fun. Started out as a high school geometry teacher. I was a nuclear engineer. I was in a system admin, cloud architect, and now here I am in data and AI.
It's beautiful, fantastic. And what drew you to AI, and also further, what drew you specifically to responsible AI?
Great question. So AI, is the new buzzword and everything. And I'm doing my research in AI governance and ethics. And so I wanted something that was going to keep my attention because I'm one of those people that's like, oh, shiny thing, oh, squirrel.
Absolutely.
And and AI is now ever evolving, and and at the company I work for, we was trying to find a way to integrate AI into what we do. And so it was just the opportunity was there for me to kind of position myself to be an expert in the space. And so when it came to the responsible AI part of it, I started to see that not just the company I was at, but a lot of small companies that's trying to get into the AI space, you there's an opportunity to develop quickly and not really pay attention to the governance around it and how it affects everyone. And so I was like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to do that.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And so I also understand the shiny object syndrome. And, with a professional background like you just laid out, I figured that we were kindred spirits like that. And so, and so
Absolutely.
how would you explain responsible AI to somebody that's a layman in the space or has no idea, or like all they think about or when they hear AI is like Skynet from Terminator? Like, how would you explain responsible AI to somebody in fourth or fifth grade?
Yeah, great question. So I will start first with what AI is. So AI is because we kind of know what it is, but we never one ever really stops to define it. So AI is where we teach computers how to do human things like make decisions and recognize patterns. And so responsible AI is making sure that those systems that we're creating are honest, they're fair, and they're clear about how they're coming up with those answers. And so using rules and guidelines to on those AI systems, we can help protect humans. And so that's how I would define responsible AI for somebody that has never heard of it.
Okay, so it's really a lot of it is about putting a responsible structure around these systems that we develop to make sure that they're making the right decisions, I guess.
Yes. And
Okay.
that they're considering the human part of the equation as well. Instead of just kind of letting it go rogue, we are thinking about how do we make sure that we are just considering how fair the systems are because it's running on data and data can be skewed. And so just ensuring that humans are ultimately safe in the end.
Okay. Okay. So conversely, how would you define irresponsible AI?
Mm.
And what are some of the potential risks that are associated with that?
Great, great. So irresponsible AI is where you design and deploy systems with no regard to human safety, privacy, or fairness. And so it aligns with the things that we uh, the early 2000s where Google and other like startup-ish companies were saying, let's just fuck around and find out, right?
Hmm.
Let's
Hmm.
let's move fast, break things with, and we'll fix it later. Like, and with AI systems, we can't do that. You have to think about humans in the beginning of the process because there's little to no chance to like fix it later. And so without these guardrails in place, you get lots of different risks. One being algorithmic bias. So I kind of mentioned earlier how data is skewed. The data is skewed when it's collected, labeled, and evaluated. So just think about if I was to ask you to think of a shoe, regardless, depending on where you are in the world, a shoe is something different to you.
Hmm.
Some people think that shoes are just dress shoes, or some people don't consider a flip flop a shoe, and so collecting that data, you need to get it from all these different places so that you are getting a nice array of data so that the data is not skewed. But then someone has to manually go in and label that data.
Hmm.
So going back to our example about the shoe, if there's a shoe, a red shoe with blue stripes on it, you may label it as just the red shoe, and I may label it as red and blue. And so now it's skewed not because we're intentionally trying to be biased. It's just that we have biases because we're human. Everybody has their human bias. And so to mitigate something like that, you need to have a diverse team. You need to have people come in and be like, hey, well, what about this? Have you considered looking at it this way? Because if we all have diverse backgrounds, we all have certain ways that we look at things. And so that is one way to mitigate that. Another potential risk is AI misalignment. And this is one of my favorite ones because it reminds everybody of the Skynets of the
Hmm.
world. So basically, AI misalignment is when the objective doesn't match the outcome. And so what you actually wanted to do is not what it's doing. So to give you a story,
Hmm.
there was a video game that they taught AI to go through, and it says go through the game and collect the most amount of points. And so they started to see that the game was just kind of circling around this one little island collecting points. And they were like, well, what's going on?
Hmm.
And what they realized is that they didn't outline all of the objectives. There's a lot of implied objectives that we have. So we know that when we go through a maze, that means you need to finish the maze, but you didn't program the computer to finish the maze. And so it had to pick a objective to accomplish, and it was collect the most points.
Hmm.
And that's what it was doing.
Okay.
So that's how you get the Skynets of the world, right? Where if you don't program a computer, these AI systems to do exactly what you want it to do, it's going to spin out of control. So
Hmm.
to make that, you want to slow down and make sure that you have all the objectives. I am talking a lot, so
It's okay. No, no, it's fascinating. So, like, it reminded me of I don't know if you've seen the movie I, Robot or read the Asimov
yes,
book. But I remember I haven't read the book in God 20, 25 years, but I remember the movie. I remember like the robots ended up taking over the world, and the mastermind behind it all was because we can do a better job of protecting humans
yes,
than humans can, right?
yes.
And so is that what you mean? Like, are those kind of like the real world consequences that could potentially come about without the right guidelines in place?
Exactly. And there are people that are making sure that these AI systems have a kill switch and that the
Mhm.
AI system can't disable that kill switch, right?
Mhm.
And that's exactly what I think of the iRobot scenario where after a series of decisions that they're making, they realize that the ultimate goal is, like you said, that they need to protect humans
Mhm.
from themselves because they're and it's where that's where the misalignment comes in. You want to make sure that you've thought of all of the objectives, and to mitigate that, again, you have to have a diverse team because
Mhm.
there's so many people that's like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this?
Okay.
So
Are
yeah.
there, are there some shorter term potential consequences that you could think of for some of the systems that are being deployed over the next couple years that would be, just some, additional examples you could give around that?
Yeah. So right now, a lot of people aren't really realizing how impactful these systems are because we're so disconnected from it. And what I mean by that is the environmental impacts that the systems can have. So in the last 5 years, in the last 5 years, these large AI systems, they're using nearly 1,000 carbon emissions per year.
Hmm.
And 5 years ago, it was only at like 200. So
Hmm.
just like it's increasing at an exponential rate. It's hogging our water resources as well. So like when OpenAI was training their model, they used 6% of the district's water supply in the last month that they
Wow.
were just training their systems.
Hmm.
So it has a the short term is in this is an environmental short term like impact um that AI can have, that I don't think a lot of people really see because they're disconnected from it. Because a
Hmm.
lot of the environmental issues that come out of this is um, the U.S. And China and like these big not company countries um, don't really see those impacts. It's the smaller countries like Sudan and the Maldives that may see these impacts, and they're not benefiting from AI, nor are um, they're thought of while they're being created. They're not
Hmm.
benefiting from AI technologies at all. So
Right.
that's one way that it's impactful in the short term.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I assume you've reviewed the White House's AI governance that came out in, I want to say that was October or so when they released it.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that that's a step in the right direction first? And where do you think it could be deficient, and where do you think it could be improved?
Yeah, I think that it is going in the right direction because the bigger organizations that hold the majority of our data, there needs to be guardrails and some type of federal regulations around them so that it protects humans.
Hmm.
And it's definitely going in the right direction. I think that um, there still needs to be work done, but the work is very challenging. I think a lot of people are like, well, just do this and this and this, but it's very difficult because these are companies. And one of the things that a lot of people, when it comes to responsible AI, is transparency.
Hmm.
And it's very difficult to do when your company and your intellectual property is what drives your company.
Hmm.
And to expose that and how it works, it's like, oh, here, just take my company, please.
Hmm.
And so it's that becomes challenging for the government to make sure that they are creating. Right now, they can only give guidance on what they can do. But I see, and I'm reading a lot of laws that's being changed or created because we're having new issues come up because of AI.
Absolutely. No, what are some of the new issues that are coming up, and how are people looking to mitigate them?
So creating deep fakes.
Oh,
This is
okay.
something that yeah.
A huge one. I'm sure you saw about the in was it the day of the Massachusetts primaries, I think. There was somebody that created a robocall of Biden's voice telling people not to go out and vote. And like that's, and when you look at like elections and how they're moving on a couple of hundred votes either way, right? And you just have to look at the last couple presidential cycles to see that. You could feasibly imagine that people using things like that to put their finger on the scale. And I worry personally. I'm very worried because I think that largely when you look at voter participation, older people generally vote in higher numbers first. Second, they've all been duped by social media over the last couple of years. I think that, not all of them, but like when you look at percentages of populations, I feel like they're far more susceptible to things like online scams, and online swaying and online, and because they didn't grow up with it, that's not native to them, right? And so that's one of the things that really worries me personally is like how, you and I can probably tell whether it's an AI generated video pretty well most of the time now without too much work. But, do you think your parents could or your grandparents?
And I'm glad that you actually brought that up because they passed the bill that said that it is illegal to use AI in order to do what they did with the Biden thing, right?
Hmm.
But if you read deep into it, it's only for cell phones or something like that. And to your point, they're running these scams on landlines.
Hmm.
And landlines, the people that have the landlines are older
Hmm.
people who are more susceptible to these types of scams. And it's
Hmm.
like there needs to be more regulation on things like that because you're exposing our most vulnerable people to this new type of fraud, and 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 they're not in a position to learn about it. Like
Hmm.
I remember my granddad asked me, "What's a website?" And it was the most challenging thing I have ever tried to explain to
Hmm.
anybody because we just know because we grew up with it. But there's a lot of things like trying to explain to an older person that or that this is fake, this is not, but it sounds like Biden, it sounds like blah blah
Right.
blah. So you
Hmm.
don't know.
Yeah.
With the deep fake videos, again, like you're saying, with the political climate, it there's no way to identify a deep fake video easily. Even if you were to, the way to do it, it still requires like a lot of time. There's no way to just look at it unless it's just a really poor quality video. They're getting really, really
Oh
good,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so, right now, some of the laws that they're trying to pass on deepfake videos, I don't know if you've heard, but like Taylor Swift, she was involved in a sexual video, like deepfake video. And so because of that, out of that, uh, spun spun the Defiance Act, I want to say. And that's an acronym, can't tell you what the acronym stands for, right?
It's too many
But
of them anyway.
yeah, it's way too long, but basically it's trying to protect people from videos like this. Like they want to hold a person that's accountable for creating this video. Like they and the people that are more susceptible to videos that are in sexual in nature like that are women. And so we're exposing so many women to a brand new way of getting harassed.
Yeah.
And the people that do this shouldn't just be able to roam free. There should be some type of consequence. There's still a lot to be desired in that act.
Hmm.
There's another one called the No Fakes Act, which uh, they're trying to see if anybody that has something to lose, and somebody creates a video of them or a picture or something, uses their voice or something like that in order to gain profit, that you can sue this person. And it's right now, like they have the publicity act right now that allows for that, but they're trying to open it up a little bit more so that just regular people, because why do I have to be famous in order to like
Right.
say that
Hmm.
you can't use my voice like
Yeah,
to
I
imitate
agree.
me?
And I think it's just easier to get the famous people. I just saw something, oh, I want to say last week, I hate the term influencer, but some YouTube personality of some kind posted something where one of her videos they took and they used it to, I mean, it wasn't her voice, but they
Mhm.
dubbed it over and used it in a ED Meds ad. Some company did, right? And it's like, okay, well, I mean, she's out here saying, I don't remember the whole story behind it,
Mhm.
but like she was like, yeah, this is like a very personal video. I was talking about my divorce. I'm like, first,
Mhm.
ma'am, I don't know why you're doing that on YouTube. But second, it sounds like you need a therapist. But second, that's I mean, that's just inherently terrifying to me. Like, can you imagine when you start scaling that up from a manipulation perspective, and I'm sure you know about all these pig butchering scams that have been going on over the last couple years. That's just the ones where that's the technical term for the ones where the people will like send you the text and like, oh my God, I thought you were my friend. It's the wrong
Mhm.
number. And then they'll get you interacting with them. And and I mean, those things really blew up during COVID when people were
Mhm.
incredibly isolated, incredibly lonely by themselves all the time, right? And the next thing you know, you're emotionally invested with somebody who happens to be a slave somewhere in Southeast Asia, literally. But I mean, that's terrifying, right? How you could essentially use, instead of it being, some random person, you could theoretically see somebody, pulling down my voice or pulling somebody else's voice down and using that as a way to get people in and, oh, this is my new number or whatever, right? And if, with a couple of with a couple of minutes of us talking, it's like the Mission Impossible where you talk, you have to say all the words and you put a little thing on your
Mhm.
throat and then all of a sudden you sound like the other person. And it's like, I don't know how,
Yep.
and again, like I've spent time over the last couple of years wondering what's gonna be our generation's what are we going to fall for, right?
Mhm.
What's going to get us, because you think about as technology continues to evolve and move forward and push forward, are we going to be off the bandwagon at some point? And will there be some kind of scam that we fall for that all these elderly folks are like the ones they're falling for now, where they're getting sucked or getting tens of thousands of dollars sucked out of them by people pretending to be somebody online, what have you? And like, I mean, maybe it could be that, but I also feel
Mhm.
like, we grew up alongside technology in a way that generations before
Mhm.
didn't, and generations after never will have the opportunity to. And so like,
Mhm.
the first website I ever made, I had to learn how to code to do it, and
Yep.
nobody has to, like, now with all the no code, low code, like you don't have to know that. And I actually just read earlier today I was reading that's there's a big problem with young folks in companies not knowing how to use things like email and Word, and they because they just never used it. And it's like I can't even imagine that. But like, I guess if you grew up texting and email wasn't the thing, you just never really engaged with it like that. So I mean, I always kind of wonder what are we gonna fall for? How are they gonna get
And
us?
and that's a great question. Like I never even thought about it like that. Like growing up beside technology, we feel like we are susceptible. At some point, we're going to be susceptible to something,
Mhm,
right? But it's like it's so far-fetched to us because we're so plugged into so many things. And
mhm,
and to your point, like the older generations, they are so removed from it, and the younger generations, they were born into it, and so there's a gap there as well. And I'm glad you actually brought that up because um, I'm mentoring this young lady, and there's so many things that she just doesn't know, and I'm just like, why don't you know this? And
mhm,
then I have to just like stop and think like, why would she know this? And
mhm,
at what point do you learn how to do this? And like I am a lead for Black Girls Code, and
mhm,
so we got laptops. We're trying
mhm,
to teach them how to program, and I was like, yeah, you have to end it with a semicolon, and they're just like, I don't know where that is. I don't know what it is and where it is on the keyboard,
mhm.
and I'm just like, what? But
Right.
to your point, like they do everything text on their phone, and the semicolon is not one of the like on the
I
prominent.
use semicolon in text. I'm not gonna lie.
I I love a semicolon.
100%, right? That's what you put before however 90% of the time, right? Like that's where you use it, right? It's
However, comma, semicolon,
yeah,
comma. I love
correct.
it.
Exactly. And it's like, but but I also like and I mean I think one of the things I've been thinking about is like with the rise of Gen AI specifically, are what are some of the skills that people are going to lose? You look at
Mm,
things like Grammarly, right? And how that's been popular for a while because people don't know how to write anymore, right? And it's not like, you know, something like having an AI chatbot like a Chat GPT or it's not Bard anymore. I forget Gemini now, I think,
mm,
or Claude or one of these other guys on your phone, and how you can like put 3 words in and say turn this into something else, and it'll do it for you, right? How is that gonna affect this? And I also, how is it gonna affect software engineers' ability to physically write code?
mm.
And I worry about what that's going to do to first the workforce over the next 15 years, but second, um, when you talk about transparency being built into systems, I think that a lot of people don't know much about. I mean, I think even some experts with black boxing and how they feed data through don't always know how, models are making decisions. With all of that in mind, how do you build transparency into these systems? And what is the potential downside if you don't?
Yeah, great, great questions. The the first thing is awareness and education, right? Um, if you don't know that it's a problem and that you need to know what the answers are, like how
Mhm,
would you even know to even question it, right? A lot of it also is that we have, I think, and I say we as a society have grown so used to technology being right or being the default that we don't ever question it. And if it is wrong, we think that we're wrong
mhm,
because we relied on it so much. So making sure that from the developer all the way down to the user is aware and educated on like the capabilities, the limitations, and any potential risk of an AI system is the first and foremost thing that helps to promote transparency. Next is making sure that there's guidelines and oversight built into the onset of these um, systems,
mhm,
and making sure that there's an audit process, um, preferably a third party auditor in the process, so that they're checking at every stage of the pipeline to make sure that there's no biases, no errors, and that it's ethically correct. And if there is any concerns, that they can go back and fix it at
mhm,
before it becomes a thing too ingrained in the system. Because as you said, like now black box is starting, it's where it kind of goes in, no one knows what's going on, how to make it visible, and um that is it's hard to pull back once it's out there.
mhm,
And lastly, efforts to make sure that it's explainable. And that means that they're able to explain how the system works, how they actually came up with the decision and the outputs. Is important that everybody in the process is focused on that. It becomes challenging to do when you're balancing this ethical way of doing things with profit.
mhm,
And so, back to, you want to build fast and now you have to have organizations and companies that's going to prioritize
mhm.
transparency and ethical use over these organizational objectives. It
Absolutely.
needs to be one of the organizational objectives, to be
Mhm.
fair.
Right. Yeah, no, and I mean, and your point about the folks in the early 2000s and break stuff, fix it later. I mean, we did fuck around and we found out, and you only need to, look at what's happened with social media specifically, and you look at
Yep.
how the ubiquity of the smartphone in like that hit in 2010 combined with like Instagram really becoming popular and Facebook becoming, I don't want to say completely ubiquitous, but more so, and especially with
Mhm.
young folks. And you just have to look at the rise in depression, anxiety, ADHD rates, and,
Yep.
and suicide rates with children from 2010 on, and how it's risen exponentially and it continues to rise. and we don't even know what the potential, like they're not adults yet, really. Like some of them are starting to become adults, but we have no idea what's really going to happen and how, and God forbid when they start having kids and what is going to, what is the generational legacy of this. And I mean, you talk about things like generational trauma and
Mhm.
how the things that your parents grew up with and they pass down to you, it's not conscious necessarily, I would hope. But but it's the just the things and the behaviors and the I mean, and you can see it with folks like, I mean, a good example I always think about is you see it with my grandparents born in the 20s and their parents and having lived through the Great Depression and how that transitioned down to my parents and the things that they grew up with no wasting and not like turning, like all of
Mhm.
that, right? And like and it's not inherently bad unless it's taken to an extreme, but how are things like that gonna, like, we have no idea how that's gonna affect society in 50 years, right? And I think that AI is going to be as transformational to society as social media has been. The two combined can be an incredible force. I don't know for good or bad, both probably. Um, and it's as somebody who has a young daughter, it worries me.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up like social media because before social media, the next big explosion was the internet, right? And no one even had any idea what was going to happen with the internet, right?
Mhm,
But then knowing what the internet brought, there should have been some type of thought process around social media, but it wasn't. But I think now with responsible AI, we're starting to learn from our past mistakes, right? We're
yeah.
talking about responsibility earlier in the conversation.
Mhm,
AI is very, very new. And so um, trying to think of how it's going to affect humans uh, is important. And but to your point, we're not going to know what what the future holds, right? But at least we're trying to do something about it. We're trying to preemptively fix those problems of our past. We know that there was, for social media, there's, depression and there's all these other things that came around it that we weren't anticipating. All
mhm,
right, now we know this information. How can this information translate to AI? What
mhm,
what things can possibly happen?
yep.
And we have this new ticker for what potential failure could look like, right? And trying to combat those things.
Absolutely, 100%. Do you think that it's government's role to monitor to I guess guide these companies and put the structures in place? And what do you think that should look like? And how do do you have any ideas around how you can strike a balance between innovation on one side and responsibility on the other?
Oh, this is a great and complex question
Hmm.
because there's so many entities that's involved in AI systems and it's challenging to pinpoint like who should be accountable for what. So for example, there are a lot of small businesses that's starting to be born out of AI, but
Hmm.
these smaller systems are leveraging these bigger platforms, the open AIs, the Googles, and the Anthropics. And so for me, I think that there should be a tiered approach to this because there is a tiered approach. You have these smaller businesses that's like offloading their responsibility to these bigger companies because they have the money and the power to do certain things that they're not able to do.
Hmm.
Um, but now how does that legally what does that legally look like? Because what does the how do you broker that conversation between um, the primary party and the secondary party? Like what they have to have that conversation on what we're going to be accountable for. But when it comes to those bigger companies, the Googles, the Anthropics, the Open AIs,
Hmm.
that I think needs to be governed. There needs to be some federal regulations around it because, like banks, if these organizations are too big to fail,
Hmm.
that the whenever anybody goes to search for anything, they call it Googling
Mhm.
because they don't even think of any other
Yeah.
platform. They don't think of any other thing. Even if you're not even using Google, you call it
Mhm.
Google,
Yeah.
right? And
Absolutely.
so it is, they're too big to fail. And when it comes to organizations in the US that are too big to fail, it needs to have some type of federal regulations around it.
Mhm.
Um, because not only will do they hold a massive amount of our personal data for each individual human, right? It now has other companies' data, and
Mhm.
other companies are attached to it. So if that big company fails, these little companies fail, and so now our country is paralyzed because of this tiered approach, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I don't envy whoever has to come up with these like legal the legal story around it all. But there needs to be something. The EU, they just released their the world's first AI, regulations. And I don't know if you read through it,
No, not
but
yet.
it's based on a risk-based approach. And
Mhm.
so it's 4 tiers. There is um, no risk, no to limited risk, or no to minimal risk, I think. And that's something like a video game. But then
Mhm.
you have limited risk, and that's a chatbot. And so when it's limited risk, it has to be transparent. How did you get that data? How did you get that answer? The next level is high risk, and that is anything that touches like medical or judicial things. And so not only does it have to conform to transparency, but there's other compliances that it has to conform to. So for instance, if we're talking about medical in the US, then it would have to also comply with HIPAA.
Right.
And then the final tier is just prohibited, like unacceptable risk. You cannot use this. And that would be something like social scoring, facial recognition, using AI to manipulate people. Um, while these technologies exist, can be created, um, you wouldn't be able to create a company that sells these products.
Right.
So,
Well, not in the EU anyway, even though
yeah,
they're doing it in other places in the world
in
already.
other places in the world. Yep.
I mean, like, and things like facial recognition, I think there's some good, I think there can be some good applications
Mhm.
for something like that. You think about, you think about theft in stores, and being able to recognize who the person is. You think about there's a lot of national security concerns around that. Things like, you know, we have terrorist watch lists and putting software into airports that watches or airports or train stations or other places that watches for these people, right? I can see some of that, but I also see how quickly it can go the other way and be used for, to just track where you are at all times, which is terrifying, you know?
Yeah. And and like you said, there's definitely some great use cases. If there's a missing child, you can
Hmm.
use
It's
facial
a great
recognition.
one.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
However, the data that's collected for systems like that is skewed. It's insane. Where especially for people of color, they're constantly identified for when it comes to some type of criminal activity, they're constantly identified for something like that. And so just making sure that
Identified or just identified?
identified as a potential person, but when they actually like do like, is
Mm,
this person? No, it's not
okay.
even close.
Okay.
And so it's not enough data, or the data that they have is not labeled properly.
Hmm.
And so that's when it kind of circles back to what I was saying earlier, where you want to make sure that you have a diverse set of data, diverse set of people that's labeling the data to make
Yeah.
sure that you're accounting for everything.
Hmm.
Um, and I know that the facial recognition systems that's out there, they've definitely gotten better. There's been studies that have just called it out. and just made people aware. So like right now in the EU, facial recognition is not a software that you can use unless it's for exactly what you just said, looking for a terrorist or if there's a missing child.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, no, and obviously, but I think obviously the while there are to your point, it's great applications for a lot
Mhm,
of these things, I think that again, it goes back to data labeling and data tagging and garbage in, garbage out. If you're building a system that's running on poorly tagged data, your system's not going to be it's going to produce, less than ideal results and less than optimal results. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a NLP expert a couple of months ago, and she was telling me about how there's many low resource languages out there for processing audio files, right?
mhm,
And we were talking about how she's saying that like in a lot of these there just isn't enough tagged data out there to truly run effective analysis on the conversations, right? And then you're left with, do you either build a system that's going to run analysis on the audio in your in the language it's spoken in, and understand that there's not enough data to create a pot to effectively analyze it and get the right results, or are you going to just translate it all to a higher resource language, right? Like English, or I think Spanish is one. There's a bunch of them that are higher resource now, and get effective analysis, but lose all the contextual and cultural conversations around that. And how does that create? How can you even create an effective
mhm.
analysis of anything in that case?
Yeah, and that kind of goes to that environmental racism where I was saying how there are so many people in the world that's not benefiting from AI because their data either doesn't exist, because if you don't have the internet, your data's not there, right?
Mhm,
And if um you just don't have those resources, then you're left out of the AI conversation. But yet there's a lot of things that you're disproportionately
mhm,
getting like affected by.
mhm,
Yeah, to your point is like you have these really large the English is one of those major, languages that you can basically do anything in,
mhm,
but there's so many other languages that's just lost because like you said, if you go with that second scenario where you're translating it to a higher language, then you've lost all those that culture, and you're basically saying that you are secondary to this,
mhm.
and now your data is skewed again
Right.
because there was bias there, and that bias may have been like it's just easier for us to do it that way, and it's
Mhm.
no malicious intent, but it's still like we need to make sure that we're getting um, a fair amount of data from all sources so that it just makes sense across the board.
100%, 100%. So I really appreciate that. So last question, love to end on a more on a really positive note. So in
Yeah.
your experience in looking at things, what's a great example of how AI has been used to create a positive social impact in a
Mm.
responsible way?
So I just recently read about this and I thought it was really cool. So um I don't know a lot about biology at all. So
Mhm,
what I know is from this paper that I read. But from what I understand, proteins are very important. They fold different ways, and there's a whole lot of different ways that you can fold protein. Didn't know
mhm.
that. Wonderful information.
Right.
But there's so many different ways that you can fold it that it would take the entirety of like the universe to figure those out.
Wow.
So this researcher was like, no one has time for this. Somebody figure this out.
Mhm,
Like, need a system that can find some valuable fold patterns or whatever.
mhm,
And DeepMind, they actually created a system called AlphaFold that was able to find 25 valuable combinations. And 25 doesn't sound like a lot until you learn that like the second place person only found three.
wow.
So
Sure. That's incredible.
it
That's
is. And
really
so
cool.
it really is cool. And so what this means is that drug companies now can use AI to find combinations of viable patterns for different drugs so that they can spend less time trying to find combinations and more times trying to solve problems because drug companies, they're trying, right before AI, what they were trying to do is make a drug that was going to impact the most people.
Hmm.
Um, it just makes sense. If we're going to spend all this money doing something, it needs to impact and help the most amount of people. But what this means now is instead of spending 10 years trying to find a viable combination, going through human trial and like getting it to its full extension, you now can do that process in like 18 months.
Oh,
And
wow.
so um, overall, what this means is that you can now personalize drugs.
Hmm.
And one of the most prominent things is that cancer right now is being treated the same regardless of what you have. Breast cancer, colon cancer, you're all getting the same chemo.
Hmm.
And everyone knows that cancer shows up in everyone differently. So, what AI can now do is give us the power to personalize drugs specifically for people. And we're saving time and money trying to do this. So,
It's amazing. It's amazing. That's fantastic. I really appreciate it. And really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. I appreciate your candor and your conversation. And thank you so much. It's been fun.
yeah, thanks for having me. This was, I nerd out. So, anytime you want to talk, let's do it.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.